Hey everyone, Colin Wilson, and here is our SEC preview. Let's start off with the Arkansas Razorbacks. So this rebuild for Arkansas is not happening just on the field. It's also happening off the field for Sam Pittman. The hiring of Dan Enos as offensive coordinator last year had serious ramifications, massive firings, transfer portal, bad team chemistry. Just struggling to create an offense in any kind of way last season was a disaster, a complete wipe here. Pittman survived a pink slip from athletic director Hunter Yurachek after the season, immediately hiring Bobby Petrino to come in and whip this offense up. Now, Petrino was a factor in the transfer portal, immediately acquiring Taylon Green, quarterback out of Boise State. The history between these two go back a long way. Bobby Petrino took the job at Missouri State and immediately made Taylon Green an offer. It was Green's first offer to a college program, which stuck out years later, and now Green is the quarterback for the Razorbacks. Now, the defense has plenty of SEC talent in two important positions. That'd be the defensive line and in the secondary. Landon Jackson, Eric Gregory are on the defensive line, and they're going to work in the trench holdovers from last year's Travis Williams, highly aggressive team in the nickel defense. Now, the secondary is going to return a couple of surprising players from last year, mostly Jalen Braxton. The corner last year had 8 passes defense, came out of nowhere, and should be a serious player on this defense for Arkansas. Now, the upgrade of Petrino helped the Razorbacks power rating, but still, mathematically, it just comes to 4.3 wins. It's right in line with the market number of 4.5. The pivotal game on this SEC schedule, if Arkansas has any chance to make a bowl game, is going to come at the neutral site of AT&T Stadium in Arlington. Now, this is going to be a road game on the schedule for Arkansas, but it will be in a neutral site, as always, in Cowboy Stadium. Now, there's every expectation for the Hogs to improve their power rating through the first month of the season. While Texas A&M doesn't have a real clean path, they have to start off with Notre Dame. They have Florida. They got a tricky spot against one of the MAC's best teams in Bowling Green. So there's no telling if their power rating is going to be up, but there's enough teams on the schedule to say that the power rating may come down. That's going to lead us to having Arkansas game of the year against Texas A&M at the end of September, on September 28th. Let's take Arkansas plus 11 in the game of the year market, in a game that they absolutely have to have if they want to have any bowl season. If Sam Pittman wants to stay employed and if Bobby Petrino wants to be the offensive coordinator, this game is a must-have so early in the season. Arkansas plus 11 game of the year, September 28th against Texas A&M is your best bet for the Razorbacks. Here's the Alabama Crimson Tide. The entire gambling world came against Alabama in the futures market when head coach Nick Saban decided to retire. An exodus of players hit the transfer portal. Those numbers in the market sagged for the Crimson Tide. But the hottest name in all of college football on the offensive end, head coach Kalen DeBoer, comes in from Washington after a trip to the national championship game. The downfield passing for the Crimson Tide is not expected to have any roadblocks, considering what DeBoer has been able to do at multiple stops. Now, the offense does have fresh faces on the offensive line, but that could be an upgrade. Center Seth McLaughlin is not there anymore. He struggled with snaps to Jalen Milroe all of last year. And guard Damian George is also not on the offensive line after having poor grades for the last couple of years. The most exciting aspect of this offense is the marriage of quarterback Jalen Milroe's arm with the Kalen DeBoer playbook. Jalen Milroe is elite in downfield passing. Last year, he completed 26 big-time throws and 0 turnover-worthy plays on passes over 20 yards. Now he gets the Kalen DeBoer route tree and plenty of weapons that are around him. The defense is going to be called by former South Carolina head coach Kane Womack, who South Alabama gave plenty of Power 4 teams trouble in the past, beating Oklahoma State last year. Now his job is to transform that Saban 4-2-5 into that 3-3-5 swarm that he had with the Jaguars. There was plenty of success here. I mean, any team that shuts down Heisman Trophy contender Ollie Gordon with Oklahoma State, it's definitely a positive for Alabama here. Now, Malachi Moore returns experience at all positions in the secondary. Defensive line Tim Keenan was highly ranked in the pass rush productivity by PFF. Alabama doesn't have a lot of drop-off in talent perspective, although there are new faces in the linebacker unit. Alabama is going to be a double-digit favorite in 9 games this season. LSU and Oklahoma project within a touchdown, while the Crimson Tide are going to be underdogs when they face Georgia. Both the win total over and conference championship futures are in play here for Alabama. Over 9.5 at plus money is suggested, but the better bet may be DeBoer to win the SEC. The Tide have a 9% chance to win the SEC. That gives them a final call of about 8-1 on their conference futures. Anything at 8-1 or better will have value on Alabama. While this bet should fear Georgia, the big bad monster in the SEC, look out for Milroe's arm. The one weakness on the Georgia team this year might be in their secondary. Take Alabama, 8-1 or better to win the SEC. That is the best bet for the Crimson Tide in 2024. Next up, the Auburn Tigers. So Hugh Freeze in year one at Auburn did actually not end very kindly. Loss at the end of the season to New Mexico State at home, and then a Jalen Milroe bomb in the Iron Bowl, and then a complete annihilation by Maryland in the Music City Bowl. It just did not end well for Hugh Freeze. And you have to wonder how much they plan on this team actually contending, considering they're saving their NIL money for future down the line for other seasons. Now, Freeze was quick to act. He fired both coordinators after last season. Defensively, the Tigers are going to welcome in DJ Durkin, fresh off a stint as DC at Texas A&M. Slot corner Keontae Scott is the name to know on this side of the ball, but he also needs to be known as one of the best punt returners in the SEC. Now, Derek Nix was elevated from an assistant on the offensive staff up to offensive coordinator, but Hugh Freeze is calling the plays here. Peyton Thorne's going to be expected to run plenty of outside zone like he did last year. He now has a wide receiver stable full of additions from the transfer portal. Now, the backfield will be dominated once again by Jarquez Hunter, who seems to be getting better every single year. Last year, he topped over 4 yards after contact with each carry. Now, the SEC schedule is the focus for a future. And Auburn will be heavy favorites over Vanderbilt and Arkansas. 3 other one-possession spreads come against Oklahoma, Kentucky, and Texas A&M. The sweet spot on the schedule is the travel to Missouri. There could be overlook for Coach Drink, who has Alabama on deck after Auburn. With a projection of 3.6 wins inside of the SEC, the conference win total is listed at 3.5 with plus money at plus 105. That is the best bet for Auburn here. Over 3.5 wins inside SEC conference play for Hugh Freeze in his second year, as Auburn is actually already looking ahead to 2025 for a run at the SEC championship. Next up, the Florida Gators. This might be the most talented team that Billy Napier has had since taking the Florida job. Graham Mertz at quarterback continues to be one of the most accurate passers in the nation, collecting 20 touchdowns with just 3 interceptions last year. Mertz also logged twice as many big-time throws as turnover-worthy plays. He only needs some protection from that offensive line to get his explosive targets the ball and get this offense going. Now, the offensive line does have 3 starters coming back. A little bit of backfill from the portal here, including Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon, who has more than 2,400 snaps of experience at tackle from San Diego State. Now, it was not a successful first year for defensive coordinator Austin Armstrong, who came over from Southern Miss. The Gators finished near dead last in stops, tackling, and opponent rush explosives. Now, Ron Roberts comes in as a co-defensive coordinator here, but he's in his 3rd spot in 3 years after being fired from Baylor and being fired from Auburn last year. Roberts did work with Napier at Louisiana during their time with the Ragin' Cajuns in the Sun Belt. So both coaches are going to be looking for success to feed off of each other. Now, safety Jordan Castell returns as the leading tackler, while interior Caleb Banks should be one of the best run stoppers. He lists at 6'6". Now, the schedule is impossible. The Gators' 5-game stretch to end the season includes Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida State. Specifically, the Bulldogs, Longhorns, and Rebels all get a bye week before they play the Gators. Florida under 4.5 is the play. This thing has moved down from 5.5, but you still have to take the under, considering how the schedule ends on this season. But playing the Gators in the opener is the Miami Hurricanes, where Florida will have full health and should play their best game of the season straight out of the gate. So if you're going to take Florida under 4.5, which is at plus money, plus 120, plus 130 in the market, complement that with a bet on Florida to start the season to beat the Miami Hurricanes. There's a chance you can cash both. Now let's talk about the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, although Nick Saban is retired, his dominance lives on with his greatest defensive coach, as Kirby Smart is looking to get a 3rd national title with the Georgia Bulldogs. Quarterback Carson Beck returns. He does not have Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey anymore, but there is a full deck of weapons here provided by the transfer portal. Florida running back Trevor Etienne joins, and Miami wide receiver Colby Young provides an explosive element out at the X receiver. Now, tight end Ben Urasek also comes in from Stanford. He's going to fill the role of Bowers just fine. He lines up all over the field. He's flashed plenty of explosiveness. Should be a huge weapon for Beck. Now, 9 of the top 13 tacklers return for defensive coordinator Glenn Schumann's defense. That's kind of impressive because the NFL raids this roster every single draft. The secondary is the focus this season. There's a lack of experience at the crucial position of nickelback. Kirby Smart even said it himself at SEC Media Days that is a critical position that they have not identified a player. Now, Georgia's going to be favored in 12 games, but realistically, there's only 3 on this schedule where they can actually be beat: Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss. Now, the Horns are going to be on a hangover after Red River. It's a great spot for Georgia. Ole Miss has a huge gap to fill last year, losing by 35 points. And the Crimson Tide have a realistic shot as an underdog to beat Georgia, considering what's going on in the Bulldogs secondary being the weakest point going against Jalen Milroe's arm. But no matter how the schedule plays out, this is the highest win total and just inflated SEC conference number odds for Georgia this season. It's astronomically higher, even higher when you look at to make the college football playoff. This team has the best odds of making the playoff. They have the best roster from a 2D perspective of getting there without having multiple injuries derail their season. With one of the highest chances to get into the semifinals, you have to consider the fact that this is a true national title contender that has it on both sides of the ball with depth and coaches that have been there before. Also, there's that hunger factor after Georgia was not in the college football playoff last year. Look to take Georgia on their quest to win a 3rd national title. 3-1 or better is the number to take on Georgia to win the national championship. And now a look at Kentucky Wildcats. So head coach Mark Stoops returns after a little bit of flirtation with Texas A&M. The Wildcats are expected to field one of the nastiest defenses in all of the SEC. After finishing top 25 in defensive stuff rate, that line for Kentucky will be led by Deion Walker at nose tackle. He created 51 pressures from the defensive interior a year ago. Easily one of the best nose tackles out there in FBS football. Now, corner Max Harrison also finished 2nd team All SEC with 5 interceptions and 4 pass breakups, completing this defense for coordinator Brad White. He had a little bit of homework this season. Kentucky finished outside the top 100 in 3rd down defense. They finished 21st in 2022, so we got to find out what the gap was for Brad White on this defense for Kentucky and get it corrected because they're great every other way. Now, the new quarterbacks here are Brock Vandegrift from Georgia and Gavin Wimsatt out of Rutgers. We've only seen 21 passing attempts out of Vandegrift since 2021, but there's an expectation for new offensive coordinator Bush Hamdan to have designed runs for Vandegrift, who has a little bit of run in his legs. We'll see how that plays out with Wimsatt, who was a late addition out of the transfer portal, but both will be vying for the starting position. Now, the SEC schedule is tough. There's road games at Texas, Tennessee, and Ole Miss. Kentucky will be an underdog at home against Georgia, and as always, they're going to finish up the season in a war with their rival Louisville. Now, the win total completely resides on a sweep of their coin flip games against South Carolina, Auburn, and Louisville. With a win total projection of 5.9 wins on the season, Kentucky under 6.5 is the best bet. Let's move into the LSU Tigers. Brian Kelly comes into his 3rd season with 20 wins under his belt already as the Tigers head coach. But there definitely is a sentiment of underachieving with no SEC championships and no sniff of the college football playoff. Offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock has moved back to Notre Dame, elevated his quarterback coach Joe Sloan, and passing game coordinator Cortez Hankton to call this offense led by new quarterback Garrett Nussmeier. New as in starter. Nuss has been here for a number of years, and he's going to be able to lean on Kyron Lacey at wide receiver, some other transfer portal additions to help him have downfield targets. Now, Nuss is going to play behind one of the best offensive lines in the country, led by future NFL first-round picks Will Campbell and Emory Jones. The complications for LSU are going to continue on defense. Last year, they allowed 6 of their 8 SEC opponents to score at least 28 points. It was revealed that the play of Harold Perkins really wasn't so much that he moved from outside linebacker into middle linebacker. It was the fact that he dealt with a weight issue most of last year. Perkins showed up to SEC Media Days, fit, trim, sub 230, and says he's ready to fly at any position on defense. Now, Blake Baker arrives as a new defensive coordinator. He was at Missouri last year, but there's some struggles going on here. Not only did Baker struggle with tackling and finishing drives while at Missouri, this LSU defense lost its defensive interior on the 2 deep. The good news for LSU is that they're going to be favored in 9 games this season. They projected 9.9 wins and 6.2 wins inside of SEC play. The schedule kept Georgia and Texas off the conference slate. And another favor comes our way with Ole Miss and Alabama going to play inside of Tiger Stadium. So those are the advantages. The list of SEC schools on this schedule that don't have the firepower to get into this LSU secondary Where they're the weakest includes South Carolina and Texas A&M. Look at the conference win totals for LSU. Projected at 6.2. We're going to go over 5.5 wins in the SEC for LSU, which is listed at plus money at plus 120. This will have plenty of reasons to cash. There is a schedule full of SEC teams that do not have the passing attack to get into that LSU secondary. Let's take them over 5.5 wins in the SEC. That is your best bet for LSU in 2024. Now for our preview on the Ole Miss Rebels. Now, Lane Kiffin went to the transfer portal and got every single all-star player that was possible at every respected position on both sides of the ball. The alumni and the boosters know that with Saban out of the SEC and an easier schedule in line for 2024, the Rebels are true SEC title contenders and maybe more. Now, Jackson Dart returns to the offense as quarterback. He had a fantastic season, 23 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, and the numbers behind the scenes back that up. His turnover-worthy play rate was completely cut down. His accuracy on passes from 10 to 20 yards shot through the roof. Now, Dart gets a ton of weapons around him. There is a holdover. Jordan Watkins had 53 catches. But then Lane Kiffin did some work in the portal here. You're getting Antoine Juice Wells from South Carolina and Trey Harris from Louisiana Tech, 2 dangerous wide receivers come to this offense. Now, the offensive line may not have Joe Moore award-winning talent on the roster, but there's over 200 starts and plenty of depth here. A huge issue for Ole Miss down the stretch last year when they could not keep healthy offensive linemen in the system. Now, the defense has as many stars as the offense, starting with Warren Nolan, who comes in from Texas A&M to fill space on the defensive interior. Now, Kiffin dropped into other SEC defenses also, getting linebacker help from Florida and Arkansas, also getting their nickel option, Yam Banks, from South Florida. Ole Miss is going to be favored in 10 games, making them a conference and playoff contender. But there's one spot on the schedule that is just too good to pass up here in the game of the year market for Ole Miss. Florida plays the toughest schedule in the nation, specifically in their last 5 games. One stretch includes Ole Miss. Now, before the Rebels play the Gators, Florida's going to have consecutive games against Georgia, Texas, and LSU. The Rebels get to clean up after those 3 games. Grab the Ole Miss -6.5 number in the game of the year market on November 23rd against Florida. That is smack dab in the middle of the toughest part of the Gators schedule. And oh, by the way, Florida has overlooked a rivalry Florida State the following week. There couldn't be a more perfect scheduling situation that favors Ole Miss in week 12 of the season on November 23rd against Florida. That is your best bet. Game of the year, Ole Miss against Florida. Good luck. Now a look at Mississippi State. So Zach Arnett only lasted 1 year after the death of Mike Leach. The Bulldogs will end that era. Did not work out offensively or defensively for Arnett. They're going to break in a new pass-heavy offense with air raid concepts with Jeff Lebby coming over from Oklahoma and previously the offensive coordinator at Ole Miss. Now, the one thing to know here is that there is going to be a complete flip in the tempo for Mississippi State. Jeff Lebby even announced at SEC Media Days that even with the new helmet communication, it may have him go faster. They always want to be in control on offense with the tempo, and Lebby finished 8th last year in OU's offense as far as pace is concerned. Now, the transfer portal is going to bring Blake Shapen out of Baylor. He's thrown for 2,000 yards, 17 total touchdowns. He does have some legs in him to take off for designed runs. But if there's an area to watch Shapen, it's really the double amount of turnover-worthy plays versus his big-time throws. Mistakes are in the forecast for Shapen in this up-tempo offense. Now, defensive coordinator Coleman Hutzler is a former Broyles Award nominee, but he's missing 7 of his top 8 tacklers off this cowbell defense. The Bulldogs are going to switch personnel. They're going to switch to a 3-4 defense. They're going to be expected to struggle against SEC teams with a fierce rushing attack. There's only 4 wins on this schedule for Mississippi State. It includes Eastern Kentucky, Toledo, UMass, and that pivotal early trip in the season going to Tempe against Arizona State. Our win total projection is closer to 5 than it is 4, giving us direction to take Mississippi State win total over 4, but -150 on the juice or better. Not anything higher than that. It should be a push with this non-conference schedule. So let's back Lebby in year 1 in Starkville for Mississippi State. A look at the Missouri Tigers. Now, on paper, there should be regression for this Missouri team that beat all expectations last year, including a victory in the Cotton Bowl over Ohio State. The offense does return a massive amount of weapons for quarterback Brady Cook. That includes wide receiver Luther Burden, who is one of the best in the nation. Now, the loss of Cody Schrader at running back is going to hurt. Head coach Eli Drinkwitz talked at SEC Media Days about his leadership in the locker room, but the transfer portal does provide plenty of backfill here. Two of the best running backs out of the Sun Belt are coming to Missouri: Marcus Carroll from Georgia State and Nate Noel out of App State. Both of these two combined for over 2,100 rushing yards a season ago. Now, defensively, the new defensive coordinator is from South Alabama, Corey Batoon. He's going to bring that 3-3-5 swarm to Columbia and a cover three coverage look that is not used by most SEC teams. You can see in the results in South Alabama and their non-conference play over recent years how good they've been with this defense. Now, Batoon is aggressive. He sends blitz on 34% of snaps. And Missouri's biggest problem last year was the fact that they could not stop explosive plays. That also contributed to a rank outside the top 100 in defensive finishing drives. Now, the schedule is about as soft as it could possibly be in SEC play. Missouri is going to be favored in 9 games this season. There's only one true underdog spot on the road, and that comes against Alabama in late October. The win total is forecasted at 9.4. Missouri has about an 8.5% chance to win the SEC, but there could be some regression with this team. Missouri's schedule, though, kind of covers that up and gives them a great shot to make the SEC title game, which is where our wager is going to be. Take Missouri 5-1 plus 500 to make the SEC title game. And the only hedge spot that you have on this schedule to go against that comes against Alabama in late October. Missouri to make the SEC championship plus 500 is the best bet for the Tigers in 2024. Let's preview the Oklahoma Sooners. Are the Sooners on their way down after a 10-win season? Entry into the SEC means you're going to get a much tougher schedule, one of the toughest in the nation for head coach Brent Venables, who made a change at both coordinator positions during the offseason. The offense is now going to be under former North Texas head coach Seth Luttrell, a product of the air raid schemes that were created by Mike Leach. Now, the offensive line is going to have 5 new faces as starters, but with offensive line coach Bill Badenbaugh is one of the best in the nation. He's been in this position before with a brand new slate at offensive line. The Sooners are almost always one of the best coached in the trench. Expect center Brandon Hickman to lead the group, graded as the 8th highest blocker in all of FBS football at the center position while he was at SMU last year. Now, quarterback Jackson Arnold, not good in his bowl debut, but the blue chip quarterback returns with plenty of weapons. Gavin Sawchuk at running back, wide receiver transfer. Deion Burks comes in from Purdue. Now, the defense got great news with the return of middle linebacker Danny Stutzman. Missed tackles were a consistent issue for this Sooners defense last year, but Stutzman only missed 11 tackles and 722 defensive snaps a year ago. Oklahoma was the big winners in the transfer portal when it comes to getting pass rushers on the defensive interior. They got Demonic Williams to come in, committed from TCU through the portal. Now, there's no worries with this offensive line considering the start of this schedule. Temple, Houston, Tulane. By the time Oklahoma plays a meaningful game against Tennessee, the offensive line will have plenty of experience. Now, although Ole Miss, Alabama, and LSU were on the schedule, the Sooners project as favorites in 7 games, and no team facing Oklahoma makes them an underdog of bigger than 6 points. Oklahoma's win total is forecasted at 7.8. Let's take the over on a Sooners team that is steamed from 7 to 7.5 in the market. Let's have no fear here. It's only up for head coach Brent Venables and the Oklahoma Sooners. Taking a look at South Carolina. So even though Shane Beamer did not make a bowl last season, there were no changes at the coordinator positions heading into this season. It's a shocking non-move considering the offense ranked 118th in sacks allowed and a defense that was 121st in tackles for loss. Simply, the trenches have not stood up for Beamer during his time at South Carolina. Havoc continues to be a major issue on both sides of the ball. The Gamecocks added Raheem Rocket Sanders from Arkansas, going to be a great compliment for their new expected quarterback, dual threat Lenoris Sellers. The 3-star redshirt freshman flashed in limited action with his RPO. Sellers lists at a whopping 6'3", 245 pounds. Should be a force in the zone read rush game for South Carolina. Now, no receiver on this roster, no wide receiver returns more than 12 catches from a year ago. And the experience is limited on the offensive line, which had a ton of injuries last year. There's a lot of bodies here, but they didn't get a lot of playing time because of injuries. And we'll see how that plays out for a South Carolina team that consistently struggles in the trench. Now, the back seven is actually going to be the strength of the 4-2-5 defense, but there's got to be improvement on the fundamentals. The Gamecocks finished bottom 20 nationally in broken tackles allowed. South Carolina is expected to start a freshman at edge with Dylan Stewart. There's a chance there that we could get the havoc that's needed out of this South Carolina defense. The good news for South Carolina, Georgia and Texas is not on this schedule. The bad news is every other team from the upper half of the SEC projections is on this schedule for South Carolina. The projection for Beamer in his fourth year is at 5.4 wins. That is in line with the market, which is at 5.5. After Old Dominion, Akron, Vanderbilt, Wofford, there just is not a single spot on the remaining schedule where South Carolina is going to be a favorite. Outside of Sellers on offense and Stewart on defense, there's still just too many questions in the trench on both sides of the ball. That's going to lead us to a wager of South Carolina under 5.5 on the season. Now a preview of the Tennessee Volunteers. The time for Nico Iamaleava is here to be the starting quarterback. Head coach Josh Heupel stated at SEC Media Days, "We expect Nico to play at a high level from the very beginning of the season." Now there's plenty of weapons here for Nico to lean on, from Squirrel White to organ burner Deontay Thornton. The offensive line is loaded with seniors, while LSU transfer Lance Hurd will fill the blindside tackle position. The Vols trench must be better than what they had in the Citrus Bowl, where the Hawkeyes were able to pressure Nico on 12 of 19 dropbacks. Now, the defense returns less than 60% of their tackles and their pass breakups from a year ago, but the defensive line is led by James Pierce, one of the most fierce pass rushers in the nation. Now, the secondary is a complete rebuild here through the two-deep depth chart, and it's going to be the primary point of attack for every SEC offense. Tennessee is going to blow out almost every non-conference game. The Bulls are going to be favored in 9 games this season. There are 3 other games that come against some heavy beef in the SEC against Alabama, Georgia, and Oklahoma. Now, outside of those 3 games, there are weeks where there is an underdog that has a fighting chance, specifically games against NC State and Florida. Now, all the teams mentioned above have outstanding quarterbacks that can get deep into secondaries. That is the one place Tennessee does not want to be attacked. The ceiling for the Vols this year is 9 wins, giving the slightest of value to one bet in the futures market. Take Tennessee to not make the playoff at minus 220, a number that should be around minus 350 on the no. The Vols do not have the back 7 to compete with the SEC's toughest teams, especially SEC's toughest passing quarterbacks. How far this team is going to go completely depends on Nico and the offense. So take Tennessee to miss the playoff, minus 220 as their season-long wager on the Volunteers. Here's our preview for the Texas Longhorns. Steve Sarkisian is riding high in 2024, getting the Longhorns to the college football playoff, only to be flashing dozens of Lamborghinis to his recruits inside of Austin. Sark's now going to send his best offense out on the field since he took the job in 2021, as Quinn Ewers made an elite jump last year in terms of accuracy and execution in a pressured pocket. Now, the running back room does lose Jonathan Brooks, but both C.J. Baxter and Jaden Blue will be back after combining for 1,000 rushing yards and 8 TDs a year ago. The portal did supply another weapon at wide receiver. Isaiah Bond moves over from Alabama. Now, the 4-2-5 defense of Pete Kwiatkowski took a large step forward last year. They now return 80% of their tackles and their pass breakups. The secondary was picked on by Washington in the playoff game, but the portal has provided new players, with Andrew Makuba coming over from Clemson and corner Javion Cole from San Jose State. As much as this roster is one of the deepest in college football at every position, the market love for Texas is just too high. Listed at 10.5 wins, the Longhorns must survive a Red River rivalry game with Oklahoma before taking on Georgia the next week. Texas has a very long history of struggling the week after Red River. Texas also would much rather see Texas A&M at the beginning of the season with a new coach, new personnel, new coordinators. Instead, Texas is going to face them in the last game of the season, which will probably be the best version of the Aggies. It's a tricky schedule for Texas, but one of the remaining issues is offensive finishing drives. The Longhorns were 4th in red zone touchdown percentage in Sark's first year. Last year, they fell to 120th in red zone TD percentage. I asked Steve Sarkisian about this at SEC Media Days. He stated that when you don't have the Wildcat package of Roschon Johnson and Bijan Robinson, it takes a lot of things out of the offensive playbook at the goal line. Look for Texas under 10.5 wins on the season. We project them at 9.9. But if the juice is too much, don't be afraid to take an alternate team total under 9.5, currently listing above plus 150. The hedge spots come in this season at the very end of the rivalry game with Texas A&M if needed. Best bet, Texas A&M under 10.5. potentially under 9.5 at heavy juice above plus 150 is the best bet for Texas in 2024. Let's take a look at Texas A&M. The long-time purgatory nightmare of the Jimbo Fisher era has finally come to an end, bringing in one of the most applauded and popular hires in all of college football with Mike Elko, former defensive coordinator. Now, the 4.25 was brought to College Station by Mike Elko in the before the 2018 season, had resounding success and plenty of potency year after year, what Elko put in place before he left and took the job at Duke. Now, Elko comes to a cupboard that is full of weapons here. Shamar Turner posted 36 pressures and 19 stops from the interior last year. And Texas A&M was a huge portal winner when edge Nick Skirton decided to transfer in from Purdue. College Station is going to be his new home. He produced 42 pressures off the edge last year and will be a big boost for this Texas A&M defense. Now, the new offensive coordinator is Colin Klein, expected to keep the same double running back RPO system concepts that they had at Kansas State. There's experience and talent in the running back room to work with. Quarterback Connor Wingman returns, but he has to stay healthy here. That is the end of the known variables with Texas A&M's offense. Essentially, their quarterback and their running backs, the offensive line and wide receiver unit are completely depleted. And if Wingman struggles to run the 21 and the 22 personnel that has multiple backs, there could be snaps in the future for Marcel Reed, who's behind him on the depth chart. Now, Elko may have won the SEC scheduling sweepstakes by avoiding Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Tennessee. And Kyle Field gets to play host to Missouri and Texas, the two toughest SEC games on the schedule. Now, for the best bet, we go to the first game of the season against Notre Dame. The Irish are now led by Mike Denbrock, the all-new offensive coordinator who formerly was at LSU, put up 42 points on Texas A&M's defense last year to end the regular season when he called the plays for the LSU Tigers. Now, the Aggies' limited offense under new personnel and schemes from Colin Klein is going to be tough to score points out of the gate against one of the best defensive fronts in college football with Notre Dame. Take the Irish +1, as Notre Dame is much more capable of scoring points on offense than Texas A&M in the first game of the season. Back the Irish +1 in week 1, and that is your Texas A&M best bet. Good luck. The Vanderbilt Commodores. So the Commodores are heading into year 4 of Clark Lee, and there are some extreme measures being taken on both sides of the ball. New coordinators, maybe a little bit new system. Let's see how Vanderbilt can handle it this year. Lee's going to take over play calling duties himself on the defensive side. You're going to expect a return to his Notre Dame days when he had one of the best nickel packages out there. It's going to feature linebacker Langston Patterson this year. And the portal had a real heavy hand in creating this roster on this side of the ball, looking to resolve a rank of 130th and allowing opponents to create quality drives. Now, there are some big changes on the Vanderbilt offense. As everybody knows by now, this is now New Mexico State East. Offensive coordinator Tim Beck comes over after having the same position in Las Cruces. Former New Mexico State head coach Jerry Kill has been added as a senior analyst. And yes, finally, quarterback Diego Pavia is going to make his way to Nashville to play some SEC football. Pavia led the Aggies to a top 25 rank and explosive passing and rushing success rate that should translate over here for the Commodores. If there's any questions about whether the new Vanderbilt offense can work in the SEC, keep in mind that Jerry Kill has beaten Hugh Freeze 2 years in a row, including a win at Jordan Hare last year. Oh, by the way, Vanderbilt has to play Auburn again this year. The win total projection comes in directly on 3 for the Commodores, exactly where the market is. Now, the schedule isn't easy. Alabama, Texas, Tennessee, a road game against Kentucky when the Wildcats are coming off of a bye. Now, victories are expected over Alcorn State and Ball State, no worries. But the non-conference game against Georgia State is where we're going to determine if Vanderbilt has a push or not on their win total. But the Panthers are in rebuild this season. They're expected to finish pretty low in the Sun Belt. It's a great chance for Vanderbilt to get to 3 wins. So with a season-long total projection of 3 and the market sitting on 3 with 3 winnable games in the non-conference slate, you're essentially banking on Vanderbilt to have one upset on this SEC schedule. Considering Jerry Kill gets to go after Hugh Freeze for a 3rd time in a row, that upset may happen this year with this newly branded offense, and for Lee to return to his roots on defense calling the plays. Let's go with a win total over for Vanderbilt, over 3. Let's hope that they get that SEC victory somewhere down the line.